A brief description of the features of Russia's economic development in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. At the end of the 19th, early 20th centuries, capitalism entered its last stage, the stage of imperialism, in the period of imperialist wars and proletarian revolutions. Imperialism is monopoly, decaying, dying capitalism. In the era of imperialism, the capitalist economic system is approaching its final line, to ruin. Under imperialism, favorable conditions are created for a direct assault on capitalism, for a socialist revolution. During this period, the center of the world revolutionary movement moved to Russia. Russia became the homeland of Leninism, and the founder and leader of the Communist Party, V.I. Lenin, the creator of this theory and the leader of the international proletariat. Tsarist Russia was the focal point of all the contradictions of imperialism, a hotbed of all kinds of oppression, capitalist, colonial, and military feudal, taken in its most inhuman and barbaric form. Lenin called Russian Tsarism military feudal imperialism. After the abolition of serfdom in 1861, the development of industrial capitalism in Russia proceeded at a faster pace than in Western Europe, despite the remnants of serfdom that delayed this development. In 25 years, from 1865 to 1890, the number of workers in large factories and railways alone increased from 706,000 to 1,433,000, that is, more than doubled. In the 90s, large-scale industry developed especially rapidly, and at the same time the process of its concentration took place. Thus, large enterprises with more than 1,000 workers in 1890 had 37.7% of workers, and in 1902 about half of all workers. In the metallurgical industry of the South, almost 70% of all workers were employed in enterprises with more than 1,000 workers. Despite the general economic backwardness of Russia at the beginning of the 20th century, the concentration of industry and the working class was higher in it than in other capitalist countries. Thus, enterprises with more than 500 workers employed 54% of all workers in Russia, while in the United States, such enterprises employed only 33% of all workers. In the 90s, along with the concentration of production, there was a process of concentration of bank capital. From 1895 to 1899, the fixed capital of large banks doubled, while the capital of small banks during the same time decreased by 4.8%. At the beginning of 1900, the 8 largest banks possessed fixed capital, which was equal to 56.3% of the total banking capital of the country. There was a process of merging of the banking capital with the industrial one. Large banks participated in the issue and placement of shares, bought up shares belonging to enterprises, and issued loans to them. On the basis of the concentration of production, the process of the formation of monopoly associations began, especially intensified during the period of the industrial crisis. Russian capitalism, with some delay in comparison with Western capitalism, began to grow into monopoly capitalism in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, that is, it began to acquire the main features inherent in imperialism. Among the first Russian monopoly associations, Lenin considers the Sugar Syndicate, oil monopolies, Prodigal, Prodamit and others. The Sugar Syndicate was founded in 1887 and initially united 206 out of 226 factories in the country. Having established a monopoly in the production and sale of sugar, the syndicate literally robbed the Russian consumer, who in 1900 paid almost 3 times more for a pood of refined sugar than the British for a pood of sugar exported by the syndicate to England. Monopoly associations in the oil industry began to emerge back in the 90s of the last century on the basis of the high concentration of this industry. In 1900, 16 firms, each producing more than 10 million poods of oil a year, controlled about 65% of all oil production and 55% of all wells. There are 2 companies in the kerosene trade, Partnership Br. Nobel and the Mazut Society, have concentrated in their hands 70% of all sales of kerosene and oil residues. In the draft program of our party, Lenin noted that the same basic processes of the development of capitalism are taking place in Russia and the same basic tasks are facing the working class as in Europe. However, this should not lead to oblivion of the specific features of Russia's economic and political development, which should find their full expression in the specific features of the program of the Russian Social Democratic Party. The first historical feature of Russia was that in our country, in contrast to Western Europe, imperialism was enmeshed in a dense network of pre-capitalist relations. The peasant reform of 1861 did not affect landlord ownership. V.I. Lenin, based on statistical data for 1905, pointed out that the land in European Russia was distributed as follows: 30,000 feudal landlords owned 70 million desiatins of the best land, and 10.5 million peasant households had only 75 million desiatins of land. The landless and landless peasantry was in semi-serfdom dependence on the landlords. There was unlimited power of the Tsarist autocracy, remnants of the medieval, semi-feudal order remained, class and national inequality, the dependence of the peasantry on the village community, without the consent of which the peasant could not sell his land allotment and receive a passport in order to go to work. Describing the contradictions in Russian reality of that time, Lenin wrote that Russia has the most backward land tenure, the wildest village and the most advanced industrial and financial capitalism. The remnants of semi-feudal relations in the countryside and the preserved pre-capitalist institutions, the oppression of the Tsarist autocracy hindered the development of Russian capitalism, were the source of the oppression of the peoples of Russia. The working class of Russia suffered no less from the remnants of serfdom and political lawlessness than from the brutal capitalist exploitation. The second feature of the historical development of Russia was the dependence of Russian Tsarism and capitalism on Western imperialism. Foreign capital had wide access to Russia to exploit the working people and plunder the richest natural resources of our country. Russian monopolies were dependent on foreign capital. This dependence was intensified by the fact that Russian financial capital was largely under the control of foreign capital. Tsarism was an agent of Western imperialism to squeeze out of the working population of Russia multi-million-dollar interest on loans that the Tsarist government received from foreign capitalists. Therefore, the struggle against Russian Tsarism meant at the same time a struggle against Western imperialism, since their interests were intertwined. And the revolution against Tsarism was to develop into a revolution against imperialism, into a proletarian revolution. During this period, the greatest popular revolution arose in Russia, led by the most revolutionary proletariat in the world, which had such a serious ally as the revolutionary peasantry. The new period has set new tasks for the Russian proletariat. A truly militant Marxist party was needed to lead the struggle of the proletariat, for the violent overthrow of the autocracy, for the destruction of capitalism and the conquest of the dictatorship of the proletariat. The presence of such a party would turn the working class of Russia into the greatest force in the country's political life. In the article The Urgent Tasks of Our Movement, published in the first issue of the newspaper Iskra, Lenin wrote, "Before us stands in all its strength an enemy fortress, from which clouds of cannonballs and bullets shower us, taking away the best fighters. We must capture this fortress, and we will take it, if all the forces of the awakening proletariat with all the forces of the Russian revolutionaries into one party which will attract all that is in Russia live and honest." By the end of the 90s was formed in our country the modern industrial proletariat, fundamentally different from the workers of the pre-reform period and from the workers of small and handicraft industries. The industrial proletariat, united by joint work at large capitalist enterprises, was distinguished by its organization and militant revolutionary qualities. In his famous work The Development of Capitalism in Russia, Lenin, on the basis of a deep scientific analysis of the socio-economic system of Russia and the class structure of Russian society, concluded that, despite the relative economic backwardness of Russia, the leading role in the impending bourgeois democratic revolution will belong to the proletariat. It also came to light, Lenin wrote, that the strength of the working class in the historical movement is immeasurably greater than its share in the total mass of the population. The preparations for the Second Congress of the RSTLP and the elaboration of the Iskra Party program took place in an atmosphere of the growth of the revolutionary movement in Russia. From economic strikes, the workers began to go over to political strikes. So, if in 1898 political strikes accounted for only 3.6% of the total number of strikes, in 1903 they increased to 22%. The working class of Russia became the vanguard of the international proletariat. However, only by eliminating handicraft in revolutionary work, eliminating ideological confusion among the Social Democrats and creating a revolutionary party of the proletariat, the Russian working class could fulfill the historical tasks facing it. Lenin believed that Russian Marxists should not mechanically copy Western European parties, that in creating their own party they had to follow an independent path. It is known that between the era of Marx and Engels, on the one hand, and the era of Lenin, on the other, there was a whole period of peaceful development of capitalism, filled with the undivided domination of the opportunism of the Second International. During this period, the parties of the Second International extolled legal, parliamentary forms of struggle, perverted Marxism, denied the necessity and inevitability of a socialist revolution and the dictatorship of the proletariat. Therefore, a merciless struggle against opportunism, for the creation of a party of a new type with a new revolutionary program, new organizational and tactical principles, became the most important task of V. I. Lenin and his associates. At the turn of the two centuries, the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 28th centuries, the most important political issue was being resolved, on which the fate of the peoples of Russia depended. Which path will the young Russian workers' movement take? Will it take the path of a bold and consistent revolutionary struggle against Tsarism and capitalism, the struggle for the dictatorship of the proletariat, along the path to which Lenin, the Iskrists, the Bolsheviks called it, or else it will slide down the path of submission to bourgeois ideology, reformism, adaptation to Tsarism and capitalism, that is, to the path onto which the Mensheviks and their predecessors tried to divert the labor movement. Economists. The ideological preparation of the Marxist Party, the development of its revolutionary program took place in an atmosphere of fierce struggle against the numerous enemies of Marxism, populists, legal Marxists, economists. To create a Marxist party in Russia, it was necessary to ideologically defeat the enemies of Marxism. The main opponents of the creation of a revolutionary party, the proletariat in this period, were the economists, economism, an ideology of opportunism, tailism and spontaneity of the labor movement, downplaying the political tasks of social democracy and the working class. The economists, their work restricts these objectives of economic struggle for the improvement of working and living conditions of within the framework of capitalism. The workers, the economic struggle, they said, and the liberals, that is, the bourgeoisie, political. They were opponents of the revolution. Since the economists denied the need for revolution, they did not need a single, cohesive party, built on the principles of centralism and discipline. They were supporters of handicrafts and disunity of local party organizations, acting at their own discretion. In 1895, V. I. Lenin created the St. Petersburg Union of the Struggle for the Liberation of the Working Class, which was the embryo of a revolutionary proletarian party in Russia. The Union of Struggle was founded on the principles of centralism and strict discipline, and the circles he created at large enterprises were the prototype of the cells of the nascent Marxist Party. The Union of Struggle for the Emancipation of the Working Class, closely linked with the masses of the workers, for the first time in Russia began to unite socialism with the workers' movement. The example of the St. Petersburg Union for the Struggle for the Liberation of the Working Class was followed by other social democratic organizations in Russia, which also united workers' circles into groups and unions. This was the case in Moscow, Kiev, Nizhny Novgorod and other cities of the country. The first Congress of the RSDLP, held in 1898, proclaimed the formation of the party. However, he was unable to unite the social democratic organizations into a single party. Neither the program nor the charter of the party was adopted, and no unified leadership was created. And after the Congress, scattered Marxist circles continued to exist, a significant part of which was infected with economism. The decisive role in the struggle for the Marxist Party, in the defeat of the economists, in the unification of scattered social democratic circles, in the preparation of the Second Congress of the RSDLP belongs to the first all-Russian Marxist political newspaper Iskra, created by V. I. Lenin. In the very first issue of Iskra, V. Lenin clearly formulated the urgent tasks of Russian social democracy. Such main tasks then were, the introduction of socialist consciousness into the spontaneous labor movement, the political organization of the working class, the preparation of the party program and the development of the ideological and organizational principles of the Marxist Party. On the pages of Iskra, as well as in his famous book What is to be Done? For the first time in the history of the workers' movement, V. Lenin scientifically substantiated the role of the party, the role of the organization of professional revolutionaries in the formation of the revolutionary ideology of the working class. Lenin, the great successor to the work of Marx, in his book What is to be Done? Worked out the ideological foundations of the Marxist Party, raised the importance of revolutionary theory, proved that only a party led by an advanced theory can fulfill the role of a vanguard fighter and a true leader of the working people. V. I. Lenin said, "Give us an organization of revolutionaries and we will turn Russia over." Lenin revealed the ideological origins of opportunism, showing that they consist primarily in admiration for the spontaneity of the labor movement and in belittling the role of socialist consciousness in the labor movement. Lenin deeply substantiated the fundamental Marxist thesis that the Marxist Party is a union of the workers' movement with scientific socialism. Based on these theses, Iskra launched a broad campaign for the implementation of Lenin's plan for building a party of a new type, for the convocation of the Second Party Congress. According to Lenin's plan, the party of the working class under the conditions of the brutal Tsarist regime was to consist of a narrow circle of cadre leaders, professional revolutionaries, and a wide network of local party organizations, surrounded by the sympathy and support of the working masses. Lenin with great love, patiently and carefully selected and educated cadres of professional revolutionaries who were to devote their entire life to the cause of the revolution.